Hi all, thanks for joining the Render Studio presentation. Okay, so the topics that we'll cover today, we'll just briefly talk about freestyle modeling within Creo / sculpting, and that's really a really fun tool. I'm sure a lot of you that have joined the webinar deal a lot with aesthetics. Maybe you're on the industrial design side, and you have to do some ideation, some concept development. Freestyle is really cool because it allows you to push and pull kind of like you would working with clay. And if you haven't used it before, there is a learning curve. It can take up to a week or two, or maybe even a month. But once you kind of understand how that tool works, it can really help you quickly create models to start fleshing out your product concept. So we'll talk about that briefly. We'll also get into Render Studio, of course, which is the main topic. And that is a rendering application or feature within Creo Parametric that harnesses the KeyShot engine. So although you don't have the full functionality of KeyShot per se, you do have the essential kind of power behind KeyShot, all the mathematics and everything that goes into their ray tracing and all that stuff to get pretty good quality renders from there, and pretty powerful stuff. So we'll talk about that briefly, a couple slides, then we'll go into a demo, and then if we have time, we'll take a look at some Q&A. So my name is Bill. There's a picture of my son and I in Orlando, Florida. So my background is in industrial design. I'm really passionate about the concept development stage. I really like ideas. I like talking about ideas almost at nauseum. But I also have some experience in KeyShot as well and rendering. So that's the passion of mine. This is a simple slide here showing Creo Freestyle. So in Creo Freestyle, the idea is that you start off with primitives. So in this case, you're seeing a cube, but you can start off with a primitive shape such as a cylinder, sphere, torus. You have those options as well. And then from there, you can stretch that shape. You can stretch this cube either by selecting a face, a vertex, an edge. You can also grab a face and click extrude and add more geometry, which will help you sculpt and get even more to work with as far as edges and stuff to push and pull and vertices. So the image on the right is what I got from that simple cube there to the left. So I started with that simple cube, and then I got this image here to the right, which is kind of like the base for my K-cup coffee machine that resembles a Keurig somewhat. So in this next image, there is the Render Studio renders. So this one on the left is a render of that coffee machine, and you can see I've added some fillets on the edges to round it off a little bit. I added this coffee cup that I designed there. So you can see that in the image of the coffee machine itself, I have this metallic dark gray color. So it has some like metallic flakes in there. The material on the coffee cup is ceramic. And then the containers for the water you see on top, those are actually a plastic that I use. So it's a see-through plastic, okay? Then the image on the right, you can see I've also added some planes and textured those as well. So for example, I have backsplash on a simple plane that I created in Creo behind the coffee machine. I have a marble texture as well on the surface that the coffee machine sits on, and then I have just a wood grain texture on the front there in the bottom right hand corner. You can also see that I have logos stamped on the machine itself. So that's called the decal within the Render Studio application. So Decals are a way for you to apply a logo, warning symbol, some other kind of symbol, or any kind of image that you need to place on a product. One thing to mention here too is if you look at that backsplash behind the coffee machine, there's a little bit of depth. So we not only have a texture map, but we also have a bump map that gives that illusion of depth. So it looks like those tiles are kind of sticking out a little bit. And then we also have that on that marble surface as well. Okay. All right, so I think I'm just going to move to Creo now, and we'll start there. Okay, so currently right now, we are in the Render Studio environment. You can find that in the Applications tab, which is up here. All right. I'm going to switch back to the Render Studio tab though. Okay, and also notice that when I went back to the Render Studio tab, my image is kind of refreshing, it's kind of recalculating, so it's kind of grainy, but it'll smooth out. And that's one of the benefits of Render Studio, is that it gives you this real-time rendering capability that you would also see in KeyShot. So you don't really have to go into render output, for example, or render here, sorry, and then browse to a folder location and click on render to actually get a rendered image. It'll actually start doing that for you live in real time, like you're seeing now. Also note that I'm in this perspective view. So this view gives me that, 2-point perspective where, it gives me a more of a realistic, real world interpretation or perspective of the model. Okay, and then I also have these real-time settings here, and these real-time settings for any of you guys that have used KeyShot before, or even this feature. There's ray bounces, so that goes back to the ray tracing. So the ray tracing it's basically a simulation of light and how it interacts with the surface of the model. So I can bump up that quality. There's shadow quality in here. I've got mine set to 1. There's caustics. This caustics right here, if I select that, what that's good for is like transparent material. So say, for example, you want to better simulate light shining through like water and light bending, or light shining through that water container for this coffee machine right here. It really helps with the bending of light and the realistic transfer of light through transparent materials. Okay. There's different custom presets. So there's this custom, which allow you to basically manually, change settings. There's basic, product, there's full simulation that really bumps all these up and checks off all the boxes. And then there's product. So if you're doing just like a basic product design and you don't really, need to simulate as if it's in like a specific kind of an environment or something, you can choose that. This would technically be kind of an interior environment, of course, because, you could picture this being in an office location. This is kind of like an industrial coffee machine here. So maybe your office at work. So I could, in theory, choose interior here, and then it'll do its best to simulate my setup here with my models and textures as if it was inside of an interior space. All right, so I'll just click OK there for now. All right, so now, briefly, I'm going to exit out of the Render Studio mode. One cool thing too is I can just click on the model mode to go, straight back here. I'm just going to click on close here in the Render Studio though. So one thing is to kind of show, how this all started. So I'm going to go to the CM1 part and activate that and expand it. And you can see here that the first feature in here is this freestyle feature. So edit definition on that. And this shows you the freestyle mesh that I use to model this part right here. And what's cool again is that it all started from this primitive shape. So here's some options that I have. I used a cube, and I can translate this thing I have the option to scale it as well, which is nice. And basically what I did from here was I kind of had an idea in my head of the look I was going for. I just kind of began just extruding this stuff out like this. You can see it starts to round it off. I'm going to deselect that guy up there. And I came in here because I knew I wanted to add fillets outside of the freestyle too, just with the normal Creo parametric tools. So I selected these surfaces, for example, and adjusted the hardness to 100%. That way I can just go ahead and apply my own filters the way that I need to, or fillets, sorry. Okay. Then from here again, of course, I could go in here and extrude these as well. Pull those out. And you can see I have the ability to select either a face or an edge. I have the faces selected, but I can grab an edge or even a point. All right, so I can quickly start, getting different shapes and experimenting. And it really allows me to be really creative and move quickly, because the quicker I can move, the easier I can develop these different concepts and say, hey, I like that idea. I don't like this one. That's too wide. Maybe the base is, looking too strong in this area. Let's kind of move this face in. You can start to kind of in your head conceptualize faster because you're moving faster with your modeling. Not that you can't move like quickly with a normal Creo parametric modeling tools, because you can of course sketch on planes and extrude those and that kind of thing, but once you get used to this tool, it's very intuitive. Okay, all right, so I'll exit out of that. So just click on cancel here. All right, so that brings me here. And I also, you can see, aside from that base feature, I've got some rounds that I applied. So I'll zoom in here, some rounds there. There's an extrusion that I made there because I want to have a little recess here in the model to collect water. So I kind of built this little tray. I use a multi-body tool to do some Boolean intersections. Did some mirroring of some things, and divide surface. This divide surface, when you're using the Render Studio feature, is crucial if you want to add a logo, because you may want to split the surface of your model in a specific area, just like this area that's highlighted in green that you see here. So I basically said, hey, this area in green is where I want to apply this PDSVISION logo. So I was able to use this divide surface to split that surface with that boundary sketch that I created. So that way, I can easily, create another surface with a sweep in that area to get a smooth surface for applying that logo the way that I need to. All right, and there's one sweep, and here's the sweep that I'm talking about right here, and I'll go into that second. So it's important for you to have a surface that isn't made up of a bunch of different parts. So I couldn't just place the logo on this black surface originally, because when I did, it multiplied that logo. So instead of like one PDSVISION logo, it multiplied into like 4, for example. So I had to recreate a surface with a sweep so that I just had one smooth surface. Then that allowed me to apply the logo in a way that it just put one version of the logo on there and didn't multiply it. That's a helpful tip and trick right there. All right, and then same thing goes for here as well. So there's that divide surface in that area, and I created my sweep for that logo. All right, then we got some buttons on here as well. And these buttons I made using the offset tool right here. So here's my power button. And I've got some more buttons here too. Let's go into these. So this is the offset surfaces command. And it basically went in here and said, I want to offset with draft. And I sketched these buttons in the sketcher environment, and it basically offset the surfaces to where those buttons are to get me that extrusion that I needed. But the main thing though is that it also follows the surface in a sense. And also if I go here to options, I can see that, the side surface is normal to the surface, which is important in this case. And then I have the side surface profile as, straight. So I want to make sure that the offset was normal to the original surface and that the profile was straight. Once I had that, I completed that feature and I got my buttons. Okay. So once that geometry has been created, this is when I then start going into the materials. So I'll activate my top level. Okay, and you can see that, in the model tab in Creo 10, I have the appearances here. If you're using an older version of Creo, it might be here in your view tab here in the appearance group. But the appearance list that you see here is great. So here's my appearances at the very top and the model appearances. So these are the model appearances are the appearances I have actually applied to models in my scene that you're seeing. Okay. The other aspect of this that's important and powerful is there is a default library that comes with Creo. And if I drop this down, you'll see, we have glass, for example. So we have gemstones, just plain glass, tinted, legacy materials like, metals and plastics, and specific kinds of metals. We have aluminum, chrome, and silver and copper, for example. Metallic paint, which is great. That's what I've applied a metallic black paint to the coffee maker. There's spray paint, there's plastics, there's frosted clear plastic, and there's wood down here as well. And then if you go into the miscellaneous folder, there's rubber and liquid, and there's fabric even. So they give you some stuff out of the box. Now for what you're seeing as far as like the tiles with the backsplash, or the surface at the back of the machine with the backsplash and the marble material and all that stuff, those are textures that I actually pulled online. So if I go to Chrome here, you can see that I just did a simple search for wood textures, and then here's marble textures. And then once I have those, I can just save those and import them in. So what I've done here is if I go back to the appearances, I've created my own textures. So there's my marble one. Let me go down here and see this one. This is the tile. So I'll grab that and go to edit. And you can see that for this one, I changed the class to ceramic and use stone. But if you look at my texture tab in here, you can see I actually pulled in an image from Chrome that I used for that backsplash. And I also have this bump map. And again, this bump map is a high contrast version of the texture, the original one, that gives me that illusion of depth. So in order for you to modify your textures that you apply to the surfaces of your products, or just like the props that you have in your scene, you have to click this eyedropper. So in this case, if I want to modify the tile, for example, I would click this eyedropper symbol, select it, and now you can see this texture tab is going to populate with these different dials that I can use to, scale the texture up, scale the texture down, rotate it. So let me go here and switch to Render Studio and turn that back on. And I'll go back into one of my custom views here. And I think I'll just go back to 4. Okay, great. So now you can see that depth on the tiles at the back. Now to show you how I did that, I'm gonna pull up the software. And this software is called GIMP. And the reason why I'm including it in the presentation is because it's completely free, and you can use it to pull in images and edit them. So like this is the original marble texture, for example, that I brought in, just like out of the box from online. Right, and that's what you're seeing here at the bottom, right? But I wanted to kind of give the illusion of depth in those darker spots. So what I did was I took this image and, I went into my brightness and contrast, and I just, bumped that up higher. And I'll lower that brightness. And then that high contrast image that I'm showing you here, I saved out, and then I imported that in as a bump. Okay, and that's what gives me the sense of depth, right? And of course, I did the same thing, for these tiles. So this is the high contrast one that gives the bump map for that sense of depth, but the original one, didn't have as much contrast, so if I turn this down, the original one looked more like that. Okay, so it's important to note, and this is the reason why I'm showing that, if you want to get the illusion of depth, for stuff like this, you want to use both a bump map here and texture map. Okay, and then from here, I can scale this stuff, right? So let's say, I want to scale that texture of the tiles, in that X direction, right? I can scroll, and you can see it's adjusting in real time. So as I go up, you can see they're actually getting smaller, right? And if I just go here and change this back to 1, for example, and hit enter, those are going to go back, but it really should be on 2, right? And then same thing with Y, right? I can do the same thing there. I can also shift position of those tiles. So I can grab my X position, I can shift those over in X. I can shift them up in that Y position. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because, you guys in some cases are going to have to work pretty quickly. You may not have months to create a render for marketing or for your manager to show off your product. So, you're not always going to be able to find perfect textures. You can also create your own if you have a great camera. Even your iPhone or your Android phone, if it has a pretty good camera, you can create pictures of tiles and marble or anything else in the world that you feel like you want to use as a texture for your environment and your models. And you can pull those in as well, but sometimes you don't have the ability to spend a lot of time on finding textures that are perfect. So you might import something that has like a seam in it or something. So let's imagine on the left side here in the tiles, there was like a crack or something wrong with the image, right? You may not have, all day to mess with that and fix it. So one thing could be like, hey, let's, push that over. Let's move it. Let's move the texture in the X and Y position so that at least that part, that imperfection in the image, won't be shown in this specific snapshot here. Okay. I'm just going to move these back to 0 here. All right. Now I can also rotate this texture. So I can take this, I can change the angle, and you can see what happens. It's going to give me that slant back there as well. We don't want that, so I'll change that to 0. Okay. Now I'm also going to select the logo surface. So I'll grab that eyedropper again and select that surface. And I apologize for my Creo running kind of slowly here. Now it wasn't the case today in the morning, but Recently, it's been slowing down for some reason, but so I don't have a texture on this one, but you can see if I go to properties, I'm using a metallic black paint. But if I go to decal, the very far right tab, I pulled in an image, I pulled in a logo. You can see it's a PDS logo flipped. And the reason it says flipped is because I brought the image in and I applied it to the front surface where that K cup would be inside there, and the logo came in flipped upside down. So I actually had to fix that. So if I go to preview texture, you can see this is the one that I'm using because the original one came positioned the other way like this. And the cool thing is it was like this. I had to flip it to get to show correctly here in the model. And then after that, I went to File, Save As. I could resave that image as flipped and then re-import it here by going into Image and selecting this button, you know, and finding my image in here to apply that. Okay. The same thing applies, you know, if I zoom in here now, let's just do that. If I zoom in here, you can see that, you know, I can scale that texture. So I can take it and let's make that, you know, to see it's getting smaller, but also notice it's multiplying on the left and right side. But if I scale this one to the same in Y, right, it's going to populate with more of the logo in the vertical and the horizontal in X and Y. So I'll just change those back to 1. Like that. There's also different types of placement for your textures and logos. So if you go into the type, there's parametric, and there's planar, there's cylindrical, spherical, box. So like if you're applying a texture, for example, that's going to go on a cardboard or some sort of box, right, that you would use to, like for packaging design or something. If you're going to create a package and you want to put a texture on that package or an image, you can use box, right? Because box will better simulate applying a texture to a box. If you just want to apply, you know, a logo to one plane of the box, you would use planar. If you're applying something to a cylinder and it has to, you know, wrap around that cylinder in a way that makes more sense, you might use cylindrical, right? And then same thing with spherical. Okay. I do have this repeat textures turned on. So I'm going to turn that off. And now you can see when I do my scaling, it's not going to repeat that texture. All right. Let's bring it down and just make it smaller. There's 0.5 and 0.5 here. So now that logo is small. All right. So I'm going to move that back to where it was. Like that. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And the reason why I'm going to zoom out is because I also want to show you here that I've inserted another light. So if I go to my scenes, you can see that I'm currently using this default scene that you start with in the Render Studio environment, but there's also some HDRI images that come with the feature that you can sample. So there's this one right here. If you hover over it, it'll tell you what the scene is. This is the mountain scene. You can add that, and it might take a moment. All right. So of course, it's going to change the lighting too, drastically. So you can see I have like a cool tone there. It's got this little bit more blue in it, right? And it changes the lighting a lot. Now, what's nice is that, you know, nobody even has to see that it's an actual mountain scene, because I've kind of created my set with these props. So So I can literally just use that scene to just, light my model. And also, if I go to edit scene, if I don't want the scene there at all, I can go to environment and background, and I can change this just to color. So now I get the same lighting that's used in that mountain scene without the actual image in the background. So I'm using the same lighting, but just not with the image. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this back. All right. You go here, environment, and I'm going to go back to my default. All right. So now I'm back here to the original one. Okay. Now, here's the thing. I also want to apply another light to this, right? So what I can do is I can go into my lights, and there's currently some default lights in the scene. We have a light right here, distance light that's applied, and we have a distant light here as well at the top. But let's say I want to add another. I'm going to go in here and grab this spotlight. Okay. So now I've added another spotlight in the scene, and what's cool is that because of where this is positioned, I'm getting the shadow now on that backsplash, which I like. So I can go in here, I can take this guy, rotate it so that I can reposition where that shadow is. If I want the shadow on the right side, I can move the light to the left to cast the shadow on the right side of the coffee maker. And we'll zoom in now and take a look. And you might be like, whoa, that is way too much light, because you can see how much highlights there are on the machine itself. And you can see here that you can adjust the intensity of the light. So in this case, we have an intensity of 1, right? So we're not completely locked into that. You can see it's so bright that it's like, just kind of blowing out the scene. It's just overwhelming. So I can just change that, for example, to like 0.125 or something. And now that's a lot softer. Now we're not getting, a scene that's completely blown out with this bright lighting. It looks a lot better. We have that shadow cast. All right. We can also change the color of the lighting as well. So if you want to add like a pastel blue tint or something, you can do that. And with people that do these realistic photography sessions, a lot of times they use 3-point lighting, and each light will have like, a light red, a light blue, right, a different color, so that you're getting a more real sense of lighting with just a hint of color in the light, so that you're simulating the spectrum of light better in the image. So you can do stuff like that as well. So yeah, I could add more lights if I want to. I can change the angle here as well, of the light cone. So the spotlight cone can be narrow and focused, right? And it could be wider. I can open up the light like this, right? So it's not as focused. You can see the light on the backsplash there change, right? There's with the light opened pretty wide, and then if I make the cone more narrow, it gets more focused on the coffee maker there, right? If you want to add some softness to the lighting, you can bump this up here as well. All right. And then denoise. This denoise is great for when you start getting those fireflies, and you can see how crisp the image is now, right? So this denoise really helps smooth out your image and give it more realism. So let's go back into that number 4 view. with that denoise turned on, right? That's pretty sharp. Okay, that's a pretty good image. And again, this isn't KeyShot. You know, we don't have the full capability of KeyShot, but the Render Studio feature or extension uses the engine that KeyShot uses to calculate all the lighting, all that stuff. So it's still pretty powerful. And that's what you're seeing here. Okay, so I'm going to close this out. All right. Again, you can adjust your real-time settings in here. If you want to actually render this, you can click on render. If you just want to screenshot, you can click this, and then you could give it a name and save it, and it'll just save a screenshot of what you're seeing here from your camera view. If I go to render though, this is where I can actually adjust what I want from my render output. So of course I can browse anywhere. I can save this to the current folder that I'm working in. I could also change the format to a TIFF or a PNG. Resolution here, I have this 1920 by 1167. I can change those here. Maximum sample, so this will render based on samples, and this is basically how many times the software is going to recalculate the image. So if I want to do it 6, I can do it 6. I can also bump this up a lot higher. I can also, go by time. I can say, hey, typically, it's to get the kind of image quality that I want, I have to do a render that takes about 3 to 5 minutes. If that's the case, you can, grab that node and adjust your, either hours, minutes, and seconds here as well. Okay. And then there's the render settings. I can choose to use the real-time settings that I use for the real-time render here in Render Studio, or I can deselect that and say, hey, you know what, for this specific render, I want to bounce up the ray bounces, I want to bounce up the indirect bounces and the shadow quality, I want to apply caustics, right? So you can make these adjustments here before you actually click on render and complete, okay? All right, so that takes us to the end of the demo portion of the presentation, and at this time I'll open it up to questions if you guys have any. Anybody have any questions? Let's see. I think we have one here. Are there different levels of Render Studio? There used to be advanced render. Mike, to give you a 100% correct answer on that, I can check. I'm 99.9% sure that there isn't another level. I believe that the Render Studio extension is just one level. There isn't like a few different tiers that give you more functionality, materials, and stuff like that. So I'm almost 100% positive that there isn't. I can check. There used to be advanced render. I believe advanced render is the old naming convention for Render Studio. I think that's just what it used to be called, or what the extension was called. And we can also look into that too. But yeah, I think that there's just one price for this, and that there aren't different versions of it. Anything else? Okay, so if you guys need to get a hold of me, if you're curious about purchasing the product or getting training on it or mentoring, you can contact myself. There's my email. You can also contact sales or the direct sales rep that you have or you've been using throughout the years. Contact them, and we can definitely spend time with you to help you get your renders up to speed and at a point to where you feel like you're satisfied with them. All right. So thank you for joining. Hope you learned something, and We hope to see you again in the future in another presentation. Okay, thanks.